Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, another in my series of what I call milestone moments. These are moments in a band's career where everything seems to come together. It could be even on their first album, and the album could go on to be one of the biggest selling albums in that genre of music. So the band that I've picked for today is Quiet Riot and their 1983 album Metal Health. When I was younger, there were basically three types of music that I was listening to. I was listening to classic rock stuff like The Doors and Hendrix and Pink Floyd and Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, and then there was traditional early 80s metal stuff that I was into, like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, the Scorpions, stuff like that. But I also really liked the LA metal, glam metal, hair metal, whatever you want to call it stuff, especially the first wave bands like Dokken, early Twisted Sister, Quiet Riot, the first couple of Motley Crue albums. And I even did a video very early on my channel where I listed my 5 favorite hair metal, glam metal, LA metal albums, and this was one of them. And I really like this album because for me, not only does it sort of usher in the LA metal, 80s metal scene, but it also really has a sound and it's sort of a foot in the 70s, and you can hear a 70s influence that runs through a lot of this album. And I think a part of that is from Kevin DuBrow, who wrote most of the songs on here. There's a few co-writes. There's one song that the whole band wrote on, but Kevin DuBrow was very influenced by 70s bands like the Small Faces, Steve Marriott, Humble Pie, Rod Stewart, stuff like that. And to me, it shows through on this record. So the band consists of, we've got Kevin DuBrow here, rest in peace, on vocals, Carlos Cavazzo on guitar. Carlos is a guitar player that doesn't get talked a lot about when people are talking about the whole LA guitar scene. You know, there were a lot of guitar shredders that came out of that scene, like George Lynch and Warren D. Martini. And Carlos Cavazzo doesn't get mentioned a lot, and I'm not sure why, because he's a great melodic player. He's got chops. I think he's got a sound, a cool sound. It's a very 80s metal guitar sound, but I like it. Frankie Banali, rest in peace, who sadly just passed away not that long ago. As I mentioned in my tribute video to Frankie, that I love his drum sound. He's one of the few guys that I can tell it's him just by the drum sound and by the way he plays. He's a great heavy hitter, like a John Bonham style drummer. Really drives the band and adds to the sound of the band. And then Rudy Sarzo on bass. Rudy Sarzo would have just left his time with Ozzy Osbourne. Rudy doesn't play on every song on this record. There's actually 2 songs played by Chuck Wright. And Chuck Wright has a really interesting bass sound. Chuck Wright plays on Metal Health and Don't Want to Let You Go. And his bass sound is very unique. It has a very bright sound and it really cuts through, and I don't know if there's like an effect or something he has on his bass. I'm not sure, but it's pretty cool. Quiet Riot was a band that had been around since the mid to late 70s. And in the 70s version of Quiet Riot, it featured Randy Rhoads on guitar. Randy Rhoads would go on to play with Ozzy Osbourne and tragically die in a plane crash. And during his time with the band, Quiet Riot released 2 albums that were only released in Japan. So Metal Health, Randy Rhoads leaves, goes to Ozzy's band. Kevin DuBrow starts his own band called DuBrow. Eventually he goes back to the Quiet Riot name. And they get hooked up with this a guy named Spencer Proffer, who I guess had a studio and invested in them and recorded this album with them. The band would go on to complain later that they had signed away their publishing rights to Spencer Proffer, and they will claim they made no money off of this album, which is really a shame. This is the first internationally released Quiet Riot album. The production on it is produced by Spencer Proffer, and the production on it, in my opinion, is really good. I threw this on my turntable just to give it a re-listen, and I thought it sounded great. The drums are super punchy, the bass sounds great, the guitar, everything. It's just a really cool sounding record. Doesn't sound dated at all to me, you know, compared to where a lot of bands would go in the 80s with the drum sounds and everything. To me, this just sounds like a good late 70s, early 80s hard rock metal album. Like I mentioned, the album would go on to sell 10 million copies, and it would sort of be the album that blew the door open for all the other LA glam hair metal bands. After Quiet Riot broke big, then it was like the record companies then just started signing everybody with teased hair and everybody that had that kind of sounding. But Quiet Riot was really the first band to do that. So let's go through the songs. Like I mentioned, there's a really interesting sort of 70s influence in some of these songs, and I really think that that's Kevin DuBrow. So the album starts with Metal Health, a kind of anthem for 80s hair metal, if you will. It's got that super catchy chorus, bang your head. It's got the video, the iconic video with this mask that would sort of almost be like that masked guy would be like a mascot for the band, if you will. So Metal Health, great song, great riff. This one is actually credited to everybody in the band, plus Carlos Cavazzo's brother. Interestingly enough, when I went on Wikipedia, some of the writing credits were different than they were on the back of the record, and this was one of them. Carlos Cavazzo's brother is listed as a writing credit on Metal Health, Bang Your Head, because Carlos and him were in a band before this called Snow. And this was supposedly the riff, a song that came from Snow. And Kevin DuBrow talks about how he would get letters from Randy Rhoads, and Randy was over in England recording with Ozzy in like late 70s, early 80s. And Randy was saying, yeah, there's all these kids over here and they're doing this thing called head banging. They're banging their heads. And that's where Kevin got the inspiration for that lyrics. So it's a really cool song. And there's a great part. I mentioned Chuck Wright and his unique bass sound where everything drops out and it's just the bass doing that. You know, God, he does this cool like little like octave walk up thing. And his bass just sounds really cool. It has a really unique sound to it. I'm not sure what it is that he's doing to it, but really cool. So great song, great video. You know, Quiet Riot kind of came around at the right time, or they put this album out, I should say, at the right time, because MTV was just getting started. And they were looking for stuff to put on the channel. And here was the whole LA scene where these guys, they looked good, they were photogenic, and they were making these videos, and it just took off. And these songs, Quiet Riot with Metal Health, and the next song I'm going to talk about, Come On Feel the Noise, they were just all over MTV at that time. So next you have Come On Feel the Noise. And this is a cover by a glam rock band from the 70s called Slade. I've talked about in my one of my earlier hair metal videos about how a lot of the LA metal bands were influenced by the 70s glam rock scene, bands like Slade and The Sweet. And so this song just sort of fits perfectly into that. Kevin DuBrow sounds a lot like Noddy Holder, and I guess this Noddy Holder is the singer for Slade, and I guess their producer Spencer Hoffer suggested this song because he heard that too. He was like, hey, Kevin sounds like the guy from Slade, let's do a Slade song. And I guess the band resisted it a little bit at first, but then it just turned out to be a massive success for them. It's got that drum intro. Frankie Banali, like I said, his drum sound is just great. He's immediately recognizable, and they kind of make the song their own. You know, they update it more, give it sort of an 80s version of the Slade song. Super catchy. It's a song you hear all the time on the radio. The video was played like crazy. Then next you have Don't Want to Let You Go. This is a really cool one. This is another one that has that 70s feel to it. I love it. Starts off with the guitar is like really clean or something, and he's really bright and clean, and he's playing this like ooh da da. Guitar line, it's almost a little bit funky, and the drums come in. And this is the other song that has Chuck Wright on bass, and his bass just sounds really awesome in this. Great catchy song, nice vocal harmonies. Ain't gonna take you from me, don't wanna let you go. This is a really super high harmony that Kevin's singing in there. Just awesome. And then next song is Slick Black Cadillac. Slick Black Cadillac was a song that was on one of the second Japanese album that the band had put out in the 70s with Randy Rhoads. And this song in their original version actually got some radio airplay in the LA area. And this was like Quiet Riot's biggest song when they played live. And Quiet Riot at this time in the 70s were a very popular live act. Their home base being a club called the Starwood, where they could go in there and play Friday and Saturday night and sell the place out, and it was a huge place. So they were an immensely popular band, and this song was sort of like their big number. So here it shows up on Metal Health, and it's pretty much done just like the version on their second Japanese album. It's updated, it's a little slicker, it's got more vocals, it's got some more, it's produced way better, but it's basically the same arrangement, and it's a great song. It's a super catchy chorus. It's got these cool sort of modulations where the chorus just sort of drops down and it keeps moving around. And I love, there's a spot in a song where everything stops and the guitar is playing this, and all these background vocals, really cool. And then the song ends with like, the guitar making these sounds to make it sound like a car horn, all these different car horns. And as the song's fading out, it goes into Love's a Bitch, where it starts with this acoustic guitar. And this is sort of like this dark, moody ballad. And this is one of my favorite songs on the record. It's got an awesome chorus. I love the way Kevin sings it and the way the acoustic guitar is. It has a lot of echo and reverb on it. So it's really sort of atmospheric and everything, and just great song. Side 2 starts off with Breathless, which is an upbeat driving one, kind of metal-ish feel to it. Good song, nice and driving. Next, Run for Cover. This is another hard rock and driving one, very sort of metal. Again, you have some songs on here that are sort of 70s vibe, like Don't Want to Let You Go and Love's a Bitch. Then you have ones that sound like what would come with the LA metal stuff, like the song Metal Health, Breathless, and here Run for Cover. I love there's like this spot where everything drops out and Frankie Banali plays like this, he plays this really cool, big sounding drum fill. He always had the toms on his drums always sounded huge. He always had a really huge sounding drum set, and it comes through on that song. Next is a song called Battle Axe, and this is a feature for Carlos Cavazzo. This is sort of like his eruption, if you will. Maybe not quite as technical or groundbreaking as Eruption, but it's still pretty cool. And like I mentioned, Carlos is a guy that, for whatever reason, doesn't get mentioned a lot when people are talking about those early 80s LA guitar players, and I think he should, because he's really tasteful. He's got a great sound, and this is really cool. It's sort of this minor key sounding instrumental thing that he does. Then following that is Let's Get Crazy, which is this is maybe one that sounds like where the band would sort of go, maybe this radio metal thing, a little bit silly, the chorus, the lyrics and everything, but it's good fun. And then the album closes with Thunderbird. Thunderbird was a song dedicated to Randy Rhoads, who had just passed. And Kevin DuBrow and Randy were very close friends. And from what I've read, the original intention when they started getting this together, this version of Quiet Riot, was that Kevin was this song was written for Randy, he had one of his nicknames for Randy was Thunderbird, and the song is all about leaving home and going away. Well, then Randy died, and the song took on just a whole new meaning. And man, I've mentioned in other videos that Randy is one of my favorite guitar players of all time. And hearing this song and the lyrics in this song and the way Kevin sings it, man, it is just very emotional. It's a ballad, but it's not at all like any of these cheesy hair metal ballads that will come later in the decade. This is just a really beautifully written song. The lyrics in it are just tug at my heartstrings when I hear it. You know, hello you, yes it's me, you can't come back, you're flying free. There's a great video. There's a couple people that have made videos for this song on YouTube where they put together sort of various pictures of Randy, and there's one that I just really love. And every time when I watch it, sometimes, man, I get choked up. I love the chorus in the song. It's just great. Fly on, Thunderbird, fly. And I love coming into the last chorus. You know, there's a big guitar solo where it sort of drops down in his minor key, and then it comes out, and Kevin sings the line, when all is said and all is done, yes, I live to carry on. And it's, oh man, it's just a great song, and what a great way to end the album. It's got a nice piano playing at the beginning of the song, and through the whole song. So just a great song and a great tribute to Randy Rhoads. So there you go, Quiet Riot's Mental Health album, the first big LA metal, glam metal, hair metal album. What do you think of this record? Let me know in the comments. Were you around back then when Quiet Riot was like all over MTV? Unfortunately, I do like the next two Quiet Riot albums. I like Condition Critical and I like Quiet Riot 3. But unfortunately, I think with Condition Critical, they started second guessing themselves, I think. And they had such a big success with this album that I think that they were trying too hard to duplicate this album. And it's I like it, but it's not as good as Mental Health. Condition Critical, they lose some of that 70s feel that I think makes this album really unique. And then Quiet Riot 3 is okay. I kind of like that. It got way too overproduced, and then in my opinion, they just lost their way. Kevin DuBrow was thrown out for an album, then he came back, and then it's just, they've got some good stuff mixed in their catalog, but it gets really kind of messy. This for me is really their best album by a long shot, and one of my favorite albums from that whole glam hair metal scene. So, all right, let me know in the comments, and make sure you hit like and subscribe. And until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.